Ladies and gentlemen, there's a moment in every relationship that no one really prepares us for. It's not the big argument, it's not the dramatic breakup, it's not even the final goodbye. It's the silence. It's that quiet shift in the energy, when the messages come slower, when the affection fades into habit, when you're sitting next to him but suddenly feel miles away. And in that moment, you start asking questions. Is he stressed? Is he tired? Am I overthinking? You want to give him the benefit of the doubt because you love him. You remember who he was in the beginning, how he made you laugh, how he showed up, how he made you feel like you were the only woman in the room. But here's the truth. No one tells you. Silence is a strategy. Sometimes it's to avoid confrontation. Sometimes it's because he's emotionally detached. And sometimes it's because he's already made a decision he hasn't had the courage to say out loud yet. And I know those hurts, because your heart still remembers every word he once said, every plan, every promise. But now, all you're left with is the void where his words used to be. When a man goes silent, many people assume he's just confused, overwhelmed, or going through something he doesn't know how to explain. And while those things can be true in certain situations, more often than not, silence is not confusion, it's a message. A very clear one. You don't need to hear the words, "I'm not interested," "I'm not sure about us," or "I've emotionally checked out," for those things to be real. Sometimes the clearest communication happens when no words are spoken at all. When a man starts to grow quiet, it's often because something inside him has shifted. He may not be ready to talk about it. He may not want to hurt you. He may not want to be the bad guy. But deep down he's already created distance, emotionally, mentally, and often physically, even if he hasn't admitted it out loud. Silence is rarely passive. It's not just a moment of peace or reflection. In relationships, especially where there was once frequent connection and communication, silence is active. It's avoidance. It's self-protection. It's emotional detachment taking shape, one unanswered message at a time. And yet most women, especially those who deeply care, give the benefit of the doubt. They assume the silence means he's struggling and needs more space, more patience, more understanding. They give more instead of pulling back. They become more available, more forgiving, more tolerant. But here's the thing, when someone cares, really cares, they don't leave you in confusion. They don't let you spiral wondering what's going on. Because care naturally seeks clarity. Love wants connection. And silence does the opposite. It isolates. It creates uncertainty. A man who truly values you will communicate, even if awkwardly, even if it's messy, even if he doesn't know exactly what to say, because his desire to stay connected will override his fear of discomfort. But when the silence stretches, when the distance keeps growing and the excuses keep piling up, you need to stop asking, what if he's just busy? And start realizing he may have already emotionally exited the relationship. This is hard to accept because the silence doesn't give you closure. It keeps you hoping for a message, a sign, a call, a confession, hoping he'll break the silence with something that makes it all make sense. But in truth, silence is the answer. It's just not the one you want. And that's what makes it so powerful. It forces you to listen to what's not being said, rather than cling to the words he said long ago. Many women ask, why couldn't he just tell me? But for some men, silence is the easiest way to avoid accountability. It saves them from being the villain. It spares them from emotional confrontation. But it also reveals a lack of respect for you and for the connection you shared. Because disappearing instead of speaking, that's a choice, a clear one. So when a man goes silent, don't rush to fill the space with explanations. Don't chase after clarity that he's refusing to give. The silence is the message. The shift in tone, the delays in response, the sudden emotional unavailability, they're all communicating something loud and clear. And the longer you ignore it, the more you betray your own intuition. The absence of words speaks louder than most people are willing to admit. We're often taught to listen to what people say, to wait for their words, their explanations, their reasoning. But in truth, it's often the absence of those words that reveals the most about how someone feels. Silence is not neutral. In relationships, it carries weight. It creates tension. It communicates discomfort, avoidance, or even rejection without needing a single sentence. When someone suddenly grows quiet, especially someone who once made an effort to talk, to share, to be present. That silence becomes deafening. It says, I'm pulling away. It says, I don't want to deal with this. It says, you're not my priority right now. And yet, because those words aren't actually spoken, many people struggle to believe the message. They wait, they rationalize, they hope there's a reason behind the quiet. Maybe he's just stressed, maybe he's unsure, maybe he'll come around. But the longer the silence continues, the more it becomes clear that it's not a temporary pause, it's a pattern. And patterns speak. Silence often protects the speaker, not the listener. A man may go quiet because he doesn't want to be honest about what he's feeling. Maybe he's lost interest. Maybe he doesn't see a future. Maybe he's talking to someone else. Saying those things out loud would force him to be accountable. So instead, he withholds. He lets you sit in the dark, wondering, overanalyzing, questioning your worth. But what he doesn't realize, or maybe doesn't care to realize, is that silence is far more painful than the truth. It leaves room for doubt. It invites self-blame. It keeps you hanging on to a connection that may no longer exist on his end. When someone loves you, they want to make sure you feel safe. Even in conflict, even in uncertainty, there is communication, there is effort. But silence removes that safety. It replaces clarity with confusion and communication with isolation. And yet, it's one of the most powerful forms of communication there is. Precisely because it forces you to fill in the blanks yourself. You start asking questions he refuses to answer. You replay memories, trying to find the moment something shifted. You cling to the past because the present feels so unclear. But the truth is, when someone cares, they don't stay silent. Even if they're unsure, even if they're conflicted, they don't just go missing emotionally. They show up, they explain, they try. Silence, in contrast, is what people choose when they want the benefit of your presence without the responsibility of your heart. And that is not love, that is convenience. Every time he doesn't respond, every time he chooses not to explain, every time he disappears and leaves you waiting, that's a decision. It may not come with a formal statement, but it's a choice all the same. And if you're constantly feeling unsettled by what he's not saying, you need to stop waiting for his words to validate what you already feel. Because that feeling in your gut, that something's off, that something's changed, it's not in your head, it's real, and the silence only confirms it. You don't need closure in the form of an apology. Sometimes silence is the clearest closure there is, not because it's kind, but because it's honest in its own brutal way. And when someone repeatedly chooses not to speak, you have to start believing what that silence is trying to tell you. Emotional withdrawal doesn't happen by accident. It's not something that suddenly appears out of nowhere without a cause. When a man begins to pull back, when his responses get shorter, when his presence becomes inconsistent, when his energy shifts, it's not random. It's a pattern, a sign, and often a decision that's happening internally before it becomes obvious on the surface. The mistake many people make is thinking this pullback is temporary, like a bad mood or a rough week. But emotional distance isn't usually just a reaction to a moment, it's a reflection of how someone is truly feeling. When a man withdraws emotionally, it's often because he's uncomfortable facing the truth of where he stands. Maybe he's not as invested anymore. Maybe he's struggling with commitment. Maybe he's wrestling with guilt, disinterest, or uncertainty. But rather than confront those feelings head on, he lets the emotional distance do the talking for him. He says less. He shares less. He initiates less. You can feel him slipping through your fingers, but he won't explain why. Instead, he becomes a ghost of the man you used to know, present in body but absent in heart. And here's the difficult part. People rarely withdraw emotionally all at once. It happens in stages. It begins with small changes, less affection, fewer compliments, shorter conversations. You brush it off, thinking he's just tired or distracted. But then the changes become more noticeable. He no longer seems excited to see you. He doesn't ask how your day was. His phone is more interesting than your presence. And you start to feel like a guest in a place where you once felt at home. The most painful part of this process is how invisible it can make you feel. You haven't been yelled at. You haven't been rejected with words. And yet the rejection is happening silently through absence, avoidance, and coldness. That's what emotional withdrawal does. It doesn't shout. It fades. It doesn't explain. It distances. And while you're sitting there trying to reconnect, trying to do more, trying to hold things together, he's already halfway out the door in his mind. Emotional withdrawal is also a form of control. By creating distance without explanation, he keeps you uncertain. You start chasing his attention, overthinking your every move, trying to figure out what changed. And in doing so, you lose sight of what you need, because you're too focused on trying to meet his unspoken expectations. That power imbalance keeps you stuck, hoping for crumbs of reassurance, while he offers less and less. It's important to remember that someone who values a relationship doesn't just disappear emotionally. Even in hard times, even when they're struggling, they let you in. They say, "I'm going through something," or "I need a bit of space, but I care about you." They don't just go cold and expect you to guess why. Emotional withdrawal without communication is not just distance, it's a message. And the message is, "I'm not willing to meet you where you are anymore." The hardest thing to do in these moments is accept that the emotional connection is breaking. It's tempting to work harder, love harder, try to bridge the gap. But real connection is mutual. It requires two people reaching toward each other. If you're the only one reaching, while he's pulling further back with each passing day, then the emotional withdrawal has already become emotional absence. And no amount of effort on your part can fill that silence if he's already chosen to detach. You shouldn't have to decode someone who once made you feel seen. In the beginning, it was all so clear. He called. He showed up. He made you feel like you mattered. He didn't just speak. He connected. You felt safe in the way he looked at you, the way he listened, the way he made space for your emotions without judgment. In those early moments, there was no guessing. You didn't question if he liked you. You didn't have to replay messages or analyze the tone of his voice. You just knew, and that knowing brought you peace. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. The words became fewer, the presence less steady, the attention less intentional. And now, you find yourself trying to read between the lines of his silence. You're no longer being spoken to. You're trying to interpret a mood, a delay, a change in energy. You wonder if it was something you said, something you did. You overthink every interaction. You ask your friends what they think it means when he replies late, when he doesn't ask how you are, when he stops making plans. You've gone from feeling chosen to feeling confused. The saddest part is how easily this becomes normal. You get used to the guessing, you adjust to the emotional gaps. You begin to lower your standards without even realizing it, just so you can hold on to a version of him that might no longer exist. You keep trying to get it right, to avoid upsetting him, to prove your worth as if you need to earn the same love he once gave you freely. But this is not love, this is emotional survival. When someone stops making you feel emotionally secure, and instead becomes someone you have to constantly decode, you're no longer in a partnership, you're in a puzzle. And the irony is, we often accept this shift because we still remember how they used to be. We cling to the good moments. The memories become anchors, and the silence becomes the storm. But the longer you stay in that storm, the more you lose yourself trying to understand someone who no longer wants to be understood by you. You shouldn't have to wake up every day wondering where you stand. You shouldn't be trying to interpret a lack of effort as he's just busy. You shouldn't be analyzing tone or frequency to measure whether you still matter to him. Because when someone values you, you don't have to guess. You don't have to decode. You feel it, not just through their words, but through their consistency, their energy, their effort. Relationships aren't meant to be constant riddles. Communication is supposed to build connection, not confusion. If you're constantly chasing clarity and rarely getting it, that's not love keeping you there. It's hope. And sometimes hope is the thing that hurts us most, because it tells us to wait just a little longer, hold on just a little tighter, try just a little harder, even when all the signs are telling us to let go. You are not asking for too much by wanting emotional clarity. You are not too sensitive for noticing the distance. And you are not wrong for craving the consistency he once gave you. If you're now being made to feel like you have to work for his attention, like you have to crack a code just to feel close to him again, then something fundamental has already changed. And that change is not yours to fix, it's his to face. A man in love rarely goes quiet without explanation. Love at its core creates a natural desire for closeness, understanding, and connection. When a man truly cares about you, silence feels foreign to him. It's uncomfortable. It doesn't sit right with his heart. He may not always know the perfect thing to say, and he may not always be emotionally fluent, but even in the messiness, he tries. He shows effort through communication, whether that means calling you after a long day, sending a message just to check in, or sitting with you to talk through what's bothering him. Love makes space for words, even when they're imperfect. When a man disappears into silence without offering clarity, there's often a reason beneath the surface, and it's usually not love, it's avoidance, uncertainty, fear of confrontation, or emotional detachment. It's far more convenient for someone who's no longer emotionally invested to say nothing at all than to sit across from you and speak an uncomfortable truth. But a man who loves you, even if he's struggling, doesn't vanish emotionally. He doesn't allow days to pass without connection, knowing you're hurting and wondering what's wrong. He doesn't let you guess what's going on inside his mind. Love is not perfect, but it is responsive. It moves toward, not away. It may stumble in how it expresses itself, but it still wants to express. That's the difference between someone who's emotionally present and someone who has already checked out, but doesn't want to admit it. The man who loves you doesn't allow silence to be the norm because he understands what silence can do to the person who cares, how it creates insecurity, doubt, and loneliness. And if he loves you, he doesn't want you to feel those things, especially not because of him. Often, when a man begins to go silent, many women internalize it. They wonder if they've done something wrong, if they've become too much, too needy, too emotional. But the truth is, when love is present, even the difficult parts of you are met with gentleness, not distance. Silence isn't a sign that you're too much, it's a sign that he's unwilling to meet you where you are. And that unwillingness isn't about your worth. It's about his readiness, his character, or sometimes his emotional capacity. A man in love will explain his silence. He'll say, "I've been quiet because I've been overwhelmed," or "I've been struggling, but I want to talk to you about it." He doesn't ghost you emotionally. He doesn't shut down without offering at least some insight. He makes an effort to bring you into his world, even if that world is messy or uncertain right now, because love, even in pain, still chooses connection. The silence that comes without reason is often a slow goodbye in disguise. It's a way of fading out without the courage to say the words. And while that silence may protect him from having a hard conversation, it leaves you with the burden of carrying all the emotional confusion. That is not what love looks like. Love might get quiet for a moment, but it always comes back with clarity, with explanation, with care. When it doesn't, it's not love pulling away, it's disinterest, fear, or emotional immaturity. And recognizing that is the first step toward protecting your own peace. Silence can be the loudest betrayal, not because of what's said, but because of what's withheld. When someone you love goes quiet, it doesn't just create confusion, it creates a vacuum where all the things that once felt certain begin to unravel. The conversations that once gave you comfort now echo with absence. The messages that used to make you feel seen are replaced with delayed replies, half-hearted responses, or worse, complete stillness. And in that silence, a different kind of pain emerges, not sharp and sudden like a breakup, but slow and heavy, like a quiet grieving. What makes this kind of silence so devastating is that it leaves room for hope. You start believing that maybe he's just overwhelmed, that maybe he'll reach out tomorrow, that maybe this distance is temporary. You rationalize the silence because it's easier to hold on to hope than to face the possibility that he's already gone, not physically, but emotionally, mentally, and energetically. And so you stay, you wait, you give him more time, more space, more understanding. But all you get in return is more silence. The betrayal isn't always in actions. It's often in what someone chooses not to do. When a man who once made you feel safe no longer makes the effort to communicate, to show up, to reassure you, that's a kind of abandonment that doesn't need words. It's the slow erosion of connection, where you're still technically together, but feel more alone than if you were actually single. Silence chips away at your confidence. It makes you question your value, your worth, and your sanity. You start asking yourself why he stopped caring, even if he never said he did. That's how silence betrays you, not with rejection, but with neglect. What hurts the most is that this kind of betrayal is invisible. There's no dramatic fight, no cruel words, no explosive ending to point at and say, "That's when it fell apart." Instead, it's the unanswered calls, the messages left on read, the invitations to connect that go ignored. And because there's no clear moment of closure, you keep holding on to the version of him you remember, to the love you once shared, to the belief that maybe things will go back to how they used to be. But silence is never just silence. It's a mirror. It reflects where someone stands, what they feel, and how invested they still are. If a man can watch you struggle in the unknown, if he can feel you drifting and not reach out, if he can sense your confusion and still choose not to bring you clarity, then his silence has already made the choice for him. He may not say the words "I don't care," but his actions or lack of them speak louder than anything he could say. We often want to believe that betrayal only happens when someone lies or cheats or walks away. But betrayal can also look like the quiet withdrawal of love, the absence of effort, the refusal to communicate when you need it most. And that betrayal is even more painful because it's dressed in silence, which makes it harder to name and even harder to heal from. You deserve more than someone who leaves you trying to read their silence like a language you were never taught. Love doesn't vanish without warning unless someone chooses to let it fade. And when silence replaces connection, it's not peace, it's avoidance, it's distance, and it's the kind of betrayal that lingers long after the silence ends. Believe the silence, not the memories. This is one of the hardest truths to accept when someone you love starts pulling away, because the memories you've built together are powerful. They're warm, familiar, and deeply emotional. They remind you of who he was in the beginning, how he looked at you, how he held your hand, how he made you laugh, how he promised things that felt so real at the time. And when the present starts to feel cold, inconsistent, or distant, your mind clings to those memories like a life raft, convincing you that the man who once showed up like that must still be in there somewhere. But the truth is, people change, and sometimes they don't even announce that change. They simply go quiet. They stop showing up the way they used to. The connection starts to feel one-sided. The effort is no longer mutual, and instead of being met with love and reassurance, you're met with silence and confusion. Still, you hold on, because you remember what it used to feel like. You remember the smiles, the words, the attention, the certainty. So you convince yourself that the silence is temporary, that the real version of him is the one from before, not the one you're experiencing now. This is where so many people get stuck, in the in-between space of who he was and who he's showing you he is now. You live in the memory instead of the moment. But here's the thing, love doesn't exist in the past, it lives in the present. And if the present is filled with silence, distance, and confusion, then that's your truth, not the version of him that showed up months ago, not the man who said all the right things during the honeymoon phase. You deserve someone whose actions today match the promises they once made. Silence is not a glitch, it's not something to ignore, it's a signal. When someone goes quiet on you, emotionally, mentally, physically, it's not your job to fill in the blanks or rewrite the story. It's your job to listen, not to what he said back then, but to how he's showing up now. Because if you keep measuring love by old memories, you'll miss the reality of what's happening in front of you. You'll excuse the red flags, you'll downplay your pain, and you'll stay in something that's already emotionally over. We all want to believe that love, once given, lasts forever. But love is not just a memory, it's a choice made over and over again in the present. A man who once loved you, but now goes silent without explanation, is not choosing love anymore. And the longer you hold on to what he was, the more disconnected you become from what is. Memory is powerful, but it can also be deceiving. It can paint over the cracks in the present. It can make you stay longer than you should, tolerate more than you deserve, and sacrifice parts of yourself for the hope that things will go back to how they were. But the past can't carry a relationship. Only the present can. And if the present is filled with silence, indifference, or emotional absence, then you must believe that more than the sweetness of what once was. Love that lasts shows itself daily, not just in grand gestures, but in consistency, presence, and communication. If he's gone silent now, if he's choosing distance over dialogue, then that silence is more honest than the most beautiful memory. It's telling you exactly where he stands, even if he's not saying a word. If you find yourself surrounded by silence, don't beg it to speak. Don't try to make sense of what he won't say, because the truth is, silence is an answer, and sometimes it's the most honest one you'll ever get. You deserve more than emotional guessing games. You deserve more than half presence and one-sided effort. You deserve someone who doesn't just speak when it's convenient, but communicates even when it's uncomfortable. Someone who doesn't disappear into silence, but leans in with clarity, care, and consistency. So believe what his silence is trying to tell you, not the potential, not the memories, not the excuses. The silence. And then choose yourself, boldly, fully, and without apology. Because peace isn't found in chasing someone's noise. It's found in honoring the quiet truth and walking away with your dignity intact. Thank you.